The UFL kicks off March 30th, but never too early to give out some crazy predictions, right? That's exactly what I'm going to do with Pro Football Newsroom's Nicholas Thorn. We choose our top 3 teams in the UFL, and we'll see if we agree on any of them. Shout out first to Royal Retros. They hooked me up with this nice OG Memphis Showboat shirt. You can go to royalretros.com, use code JLS, and get 10% off your order. Let's bring in Nicholas Thorn here from Pro Football Newsroom. Nicholas, all of a sudden we've gotten busy here after we kept waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen with this merger, right?
Yeah, it's crazy to think, though. Last time I was on your show 6 months ago, we had 2 leagues. We were talking about players going to the NFL, and it's spring football, so a lot changes in 6 months. But now we've got through this process. We can kind of look at rosters and see where teams are at for the first time in a little bit.
All right, so what we're going to do here, and Nicholas is one of the best at breaking down personnel, so this is kind of an amateur versus a pro here, so we're going to see how this goes, and we'll see if we can agree on this. We're going to pick our top 3 teams as we see them, and then we're going to choose a player to watch on each of these teams. So, Nicholas, let's just go ahead and start off here. Who do you think is number 3 heading into the UFL season?
So my number 3 team is Arlington. The Renegades, obviously, XFL champions last year. They retained a lot of their roster. And the player I want to highlight specifically with Arlington is Devin Darrington, running back from the Orlando Guardians. They drafted in the XFL dispersal draft. He brings a different kind of vibe to that running back room, whereas they had a lot of plotters last year. And in general, the running back room was something that they lacked explosive plays from. He actually gives that to them. He had like one of the highest rates of like big plays last year for the Guardians, and I think that could be another thing to watch. Is as guys like Devion Smith start to get cycled out of that backfield, and he gets more snaps.
All right, well, I'll tell you who I've got at number 3 here, and we might agree a little bit on this. And I like the Memphis Showboats, and the reason I say that, Nicholas, is because I love what John DeFilippo did with New Orleans last year, and it feels like he brought in some of the best, really, of the breakers, including Sage Surratt, who I think was one of the best tight ends in the league. Memphis drafted wide receiver DeAndre Overton from Philly, which leads me to my player to watch, and that's easy for me because it's former Stars quarterback Case Cookus. Because as many people out there know, Cookus went to the 2022 title game. USFL title game. He had a good 2023, despite it felt like he was sacked, he was behind an O-line that really didn't protect him, I thought, as well this past season. Now, Cole Kelly, who was a starter there, was kind of middle of the pack for Memphis. Seems like John DeFilippo brought in Cookus to kind of upgrade that position, so we'll see on that. So that's my number 3. Who's your number 2, Nicholas?
Yeah, with Memphis especially, when you're adding a top quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end out of a draft, you did pretty good. But for my number 2, I'm going with DC. This is a little bit higher than most people are going to have them because of the quarterback position. I just am so high on that roster that it doesn't bother me having a Jalen McClendon at quarterback for the time being, although if Jordan Teamu was to be added to that roster, they really contend with number 1, who we'll get to in a second. But I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to name 2 players for DC in Trent Harris and Tim Ward, the 2 edge rushers from the Roughnecks last year. They were a great duo when they were both healthy. Tim Ward missed most of the second half of the season. They week 1 last year had a combined 6 sacks against the Guardians. The Guardians have a bad offensive line, but still they can pressure the quarterback. And DC already had a pretty good edge group, but these 2 guys are, to me, the 2 clear starters to start out this year. And I think this defense is going to be a force to be reckoned with.
Yep. No, you can cheat. That's fine. Take as many players as you want because no one knows players like you, man. If anybody who has read your work on Pro Football Newsroom, they know about that. For my numbers, and I really wanted to go with the defenders, but that quarterback situation, it was really hard for me to try to pick them at number 2. Now, that said, I'm going to cheat here because my number 2 team is the St. Louis Battlehawks because, they had the XFL's leading touchdown passer in A.J. McCarron. But, head coach Anthony Becht, I think he's picked up some talent offensively. I love the Jakur Pearson pick, the receiver from Seattle, led the league in receptions and yards. Beck felt to me, Nicholas, like he really looked like he was trying to rebuild the Battlehawks defense as well, because they lost a lot. And that kind of leads me to the player to watch is we go into the 2023 UFL or 2024 UFL season, and Quinterio Cole is another former Sea Dragon who is a defensive back, outstanding in Seattle. He had some time in 2022 in the NFL. So I think that could be a player to watch as St. Louis tries to maybe revamp a little bit of the offense, but certainly revamp that defense. And I think he could be a leader. I think Cole could be a leader for St. Louis on defense. So that's my number 2 team. So let's see if we're going to agree on the number 1 team. I don't think we will, but let's go for it.
We'll see. So my number 1 team is the Birmingham Stallions. I really wanted to get cute and pick someone else, but I mean, just looking at the roster, it's really hard to.
Yeah.
They added so many pieces before the draft that are legit NFL talents. And the one that's the most intriguing to me is former Clemson wide receiver Amari Rodgers. You know, just a couple of years ago, he was a 3rd round pick in the NFL. Left the league very quickly due to some fumbling issues. Struggled in Green Bay, struggled in Houston. But he's a guy who, in a spring football league, he has immense talent. And I think right now you look at a pretty good receiving core, but he could potentially be a true difference maker in a league like this. As a guy who, if he puts it all together, he's only 24 still somehow, despite being washed through the league. I think he's a guy to really keep an eye on as a potential high talent player for this league in 2024.
Well, now I feel good about my number 1 pick because we agree. I have the Birmingham Stallions up there. That another team really that on the outside might look like they have some quarterback issues because Alex Magoo, went to the NFL. But the thing is, Jamar Smith, he's coming back, and he was the 2023 starter before he got hurt, and then Alex Magoo comes in and takes him to another championship in the USFL. But I think they also added Adrian Martinez, and he might battle with Jamar Smith there. So they've got some depth at quarterback either way. And, and the player that I think to watch for me is like head coach Skip Holtz. He loved Bo Scarborough. And he brought him back, running back, brought him back. Although he wasn't protected, he didn't love him enough to protect him in the draft, to protect him on the roster. He goes into the dispersal draft, and then Skip Holtz picks him back up. So Scarborough could be one of those players to watch. And honestly, Nick, I mean, you got Holtz at head coach who lifted that trophy twice in the USFL. Hard to say he can't do it again. So another player, I'll cheat too. Another player that I think to watch now. I'm going to go outside the box here a little bit and see if you agree with me on this one. A player that some people might want to watch is Chris Blewett, the kicker, because he was great for the Pittsburgh Maulers and helped them win a lot of games. And they had to replace Brandon Aubrey, who a lot of people out there know his name because of what he's done with the Dallas Cowboys now. So I just like that roster a lot, and I like Skip Holtz. So I went to a couple of Birmingham games, so maybe I'm biased, but I think we agree on number 1 there because this just feels like they could come in here and do really well in this new combined league.
Yeah, you could pick like 12 names that as like
Right.
a player to watch. I mean, seriously, if you look at every position, they added guys like straight out of the NFL. They really is. Everyone else was kind of sitting back, waiting, trying to figure out like what are we gonna do with this UFL offseason. They're like, we are going to sign every player available possible to our
Right.
roster. And then on top of it, they did pretty good in the dispersal drafts too. So they're a force to be reckoned with, especially on that offensive line. They've got just ridiculous amounts of talent right now. So they're the team to beat until proven otherwise for me.
I'm with you on that one. But we talked about too. The XFL champion was Arlington. They've got some interesting picks there. They've got Luis Perez, who comes back. He was, he won a championship, but he might have a battle at quarterbacks. But I think we both like them.
Yeah. For me, with them at 3, I still am very high on that roster. The one thing that like holds them back for me is the aggressive turnover in the secondary, where they are losing every single starter from that championship team when healthy. And although they got a Genie Harris and they picked up some guys I like in the offseason, it's just we haven't seen it yet from that group. But outside of that, there's still a really good roster. And yeah, at quarterback, I really hope Lindsey Scott and Holton Athers gives it Perez at least a really good push, because I like seeing young guys in these leagues that have NFL potential, and I think both those guys do.
No question. We're getting closer to that March 30th kickoff. Now, a lot can happen. You can have maybe some more free agent signings. You might have, some issues in training camp. You never know. But I'm optimistic, maybe cautiously optimistic about this 8-team league and how it gets started. I mean, how about you when you look at it? I know you covered both, but when you look at this 8-team league coming together, what do you think?
I think I wish it was 10 or 12
I'm with you.
team league, where you look at the rosters and you're like, man, these teams are stacked almost too much. It really feels like at certain places you look at certain position groups and you're like, wow, that I think St. Louis has like 9 or 10 offensive linemen right now that were starters last year. And so they're going to be cutting guys who were starting games last year. So that's not a one-off thing. Every team has a position where you're just like, that's absurd that they have that many good players at that position. So obviously, there's financial things that are above my pay grade, but looking at the rosters, I mean, if you're going to spin it into a positive, there's a lot of depth in this league right now. There's a lot of injury-proof teams at the moment.
And that's not a bad thing. Listen, check out Nicholas Thorn, Pro Football Newsroom. He breaks it down like no other. Nicholas, thank you for joining me here.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for watching. And remember, go to royalretros.com, use code JLS, get 10% off your gear from yesteryear. royalretros.com, use code JLS.